we've had a lot of success in not sort of like going to where the activity is, but going to where the activity will be. But our whole thesis was that Ethereum L2s were going to grow exponentially, right? Even in going into a bear market, that they would grow exponentially. And that thesis is very much played out. And I really think we're still just in the very beginnings of it. And so when we think about where to devote our sort of time and attention, we think focus is a moat, and you can see this in the fact that multi-chain DEXs really struggle outside of one core ecosystem.
Pear is an innovative pair trading exchange built on top of SYMMIO. Users can trade trending narratives with one click, from blue-chip narratives such as long BTC, short ETH, right to the WIF versus BONK. The hat stays on. SYMMIO's intent-centric architecture enables deep liquidity, source off-chain, and broad on-chain, and combined with Pear, has democratized access to complex trading strategies typically reserved for institutional traders.
Nothing said on 0x Research is a recommendation to buy or sell securities or tokens. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and any views expressed by anyone on the show are solely our opinions, not financial advice. Boccaccio, Ryan, and our guests may hold positions in the companies, funds, or projects discussed. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of 0x Research. Today, I'm joined by Alex and Ace, core contributors at Velodrome and Aerodrome, as well as Pibbles, who's one of my favorite colleagues at Blockworks Research. As a reminder, you can use code 0xresearch10 for 10% off your Blockworks Research subscription. All right, let's get to it. Thank you for joining us, Alex and Ace. How are you guys doing?
Doing great.
Well.
Been a big
Exciting
week.
Yeah, we're in sync. Look at us.
Before we get started, I feel like it's important to give an overview of Velodrome and Aerodrome and how they fit into this space as a DEX, because you guys do something pretty novel with the VE free dynamics. So it'd be great to get a brief introduction on that.
Yeah, happy to dive in. So yeah, I think the best way to think about Velodrome and Aerodrome are as what we call MetaDEXs. And fundamentally what a MetaDEX is one that sort of combines all the best elements from other DEX primitives. So Velodrome and Aerodrome both combine the best of Curve, Convex, UniV2, UniV3, and additional layers like Vodium, all into one single streamlined DEX design. So what that means practically, right, is that, if you are a project seeking to build liquidity on your token, if you are a trader, if you are a liquidity provider, rather than having to sort of pick and choose, which DEX model, which AMM model is best for you, and maybe jump between 4 different DEXs, 4 different tokenomics designs, and all of the complexity associated with that, in addition to the layers built on top of each one, each taking its own fee or cut. We build that all into the base layer. And what we think that provides is a very unique and novel solution, both for those looking to attract and build liquidity, as well as traders and swappers. And of course, that has resulted in us being not only the sort of leading DEX of Optimism mainnet and the Superchain, but also on Base. And I believe, Aerodrome might be now like the 5th or 6th largest DEX by TVL anywhere in DeFi.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think one of the core components of the Velodrome team's build approach is really emphasizing public goods and, stepping away from rent-seeking behavior. So we've really tried to provide a balanced system for anybody who wants to come in from any of the 3 major components, whether you're providing liquidity, trading. I think trading is what we all do, but we want to have efficient swaps, protocols who really are seeking an efficient way to deepen liquidity. And we have this voting layer, which is novel, and it engages probably everybody in the stack.
Do you guys want to talk a bit more about that voting layer aspect? Because I feel like that's one of the parts that I think is a bit complicated. in terms of Velodrome?
Yeah, I think the best way to think of it is, one is, of course, if you're familiar at all with Curve's model, right? It works very similar to the extent that you can take the Velo or Aero token, you can lock it for up to 4 years, and what that gives you is the ability to vote each week to direct protocol emissions. And emissions are basically the incentives to liquidity providers. So you are choosing, which pools on any given week, a wrapped ETH pool, a OP token pool, et cetera, are receiving emissions and thus, are growing liquidity. But this only really works because our system directs 100% of the fees and rewards that the protocol generates back to those token lockers, basically in exchange for their participation, right? It's basically an incentive. So in the Curve model, I think one of the issues that was identified and sort of fixed in our model is that when you vote for pools on Curve, there's no incentive necessarily to vote for the most productive pool. You as a VE/CRV holder are getting the same cut of fees, whether you're voting for a pair there that is generating $1 million in revenue or like 100K in revenue, right? You get the same reward. So in our system, you only get the rewards for the pools that you vote for. And all that essentially means is that every voter is incentivized to vote for only the most productive pools. So the pools generating the most fees will get the most votes, will get the most emissions, and it turns into this sort of growth flywheel. And we also don't slice and dice the rewards along the way. On Curve, 50% of the fees are going to liquidity providers, and 50% are being distributed to everyone equally. That locks CRV. For us, 100% of those rewards are going to voters. And so we do think that this is like very novel. We think this is like DeFi as it should be. It shouldn't be like what you see with Uniswap, which is for years, there's been no direct revenue, either flowing directly to the Uniswap foundations or labs, let alone token holders. It's always been this promise that maybe one day the token would turn on the fee switch, right? And there'd be some sort of cut of revenue going to token holders or token stakers, or however they decide to sort of implement that. For us, from day one, the fee switch has been on, right? And it's been set to 100%. And we, as the Velodrome or Aerodrome foundations, are just token lockers like any other, right? We only earn rewards how any other participant earns rewards. And so that basically aligns incentives, I think, very, very well, in that there's no team cuts, there's no like team liquid token allocations to be sold on market. The whole system works like DeFi should, which is if the protocol is creating rewards, those rewards only go one place, which is to participants. And even the foundations, right, are just participants in the system like any others. We lock new tokens to try to, shore up our own voting power against inflation. And we think that's basically how things should be.
That makes sense. And under this system, as far as I understand, you kind of not force, but you incentivize other protocols to be more active in how they deal with their liquidity. Do you kind of want to talk about this and a bit about how the experience for protocols is on your DEX, on Velodrome and Aerodrome, versus on, let's say, if they wanted to launch liquidity on another DEX?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the strengths that is perhaps unsung with our team and the way that we interact with the various protocols that we're partnering with. As Alex has, eloquently walked you through the voting process and the V33 model, it's not easy to grok in, say, 30 seconds. Unfortunately, that's one of the big challenges. So it does require quite a bit of education, some strategy planning with our protocol partners, and every protocol has different needs. So you really have to understand, and this is kind of how we operate as a B2B company in some respects. Different protocols, have, like I said, different liquidity needs. Some have their own liquidity that they're onboarding to the protocol themselves, and they just want to create an efficient treasury mechanism. Others have very little liquidity and they need help bootstrapping from kind of ground zero. So, the process is like, you have to help those teams come up with an efficient way of achieving their protocol liquidity goals. And this is where, we have different ways of achieving that for them. And, the most efficient way in the early days here on Aerodrome, for example, is by providing voting incentives. So what's really interesting about Aerodrome is that we're still seeing extremely high multiples in terms of the Aero emissions relative to the amount of dollars that any protocol can deposit for an incentive to voters. At its highest, I think they were getting a 4 to 5x multiple on their voting incentives, which is pretty crazy. Like, I would challenge anybody in DeFi to find anything close, let alone private market maker deals that you're paying lots of money to get liquidity required for your token. Even in the most recent couple of weeks where we had a pretty big market pullback, the multiple only fell to 2.5 times. So you're still getting extremely high efficiency on voting incentives. So that's kind of the most basic way of achieving liquidity. Voters are going to like to see that. They're going to direct their votes to your pool, and then you get the Aero emissions that incentivize LPs. The other ways that we're helping protocols who have their own liquidity is by encouraging them to farm Aero, just like you and I would as LPs, then take that Aero and lock it up. We are actually providing VE Aero incentives as part of our flight school program. So the higher number of Aero you lock, the more you'll receive in terms of bonus. And direct voting for your pool is it's essentially a free way of getting emissions for your liquidity. So we're seeing, zero cost basis type incentives programs from teams that have their own treasury that are being deposited onto Aerodrome or Velodrome. So yeah, it's been, I would say, quite a custom experience, and we do provide this sort of white glove strategy planning with our protocol partners, and it keeps the job interesting and fun, and obviously it helps us kind of stay in tune with what's happening in DeFi.
I imagine it's also beneficial for you guys because you get to learn about protocols and like potentially good partners ahead of time as they seek you guys for liquidity. So as far as I understand, for protocols, they get a different deal. But what about liquidity providers? Because Alex, you mentioned that on other DEXs, LPs get a bit of the emissions, a bit of the fees, as well as some other rewards. How does it work? I mean, you already described that it mainly goes to voters, but how has that affected like user behavior? And do you think LPs get a better deal in the end?
Yeah, I think there's a few dynamics to discuss here. I mean, one is that having the optionality, right, to choose what kind of pools you want to provide liquidity on is huge here, right? If you want to sort of provide liquidity on a curve style SAMM sort of pool, optimized for basically stable, you've got plenty of those as an option. If you want to provide liquidity on pools that are VAMM, so this is your classic sort of UniV2 style full range liquidity, you can focus there. Or, if you're feeling a little more adventurous and you want to provide liquidity on a UniV3 style concentrated pool, you've got those options as well. So the first thing I think for liquidity providers is, again, in one place, you've got this full spread of options. And then, of course, just by nature of us being the liquidity hubs of Optimism and Base, you've got almost every major ecosystem token available. So that's like a ton of optionality without you needing to jump between 3 different DEXs and figure out which is best for you. But the other big benefit I think that comes in is that by virtue of the rewards being a flow of velo or aero emissions, it's also a very predictable stream of rewards, right? You're not needing to worry about the relative degree of like trading volume on a given day or week. You're not needing to sort of hyper optimize for fees. This is just like each week you know what the stream of rewards will be. You'll know roughly, at what size of that pool you are. And so it makes it just kind of a more like predictable experience. And I think this is especially important in the context of Slipstream, right? We have been watching volumes, of course, for a long time. And, most weekends, like what you see is on Base and Optimism, like the volumes are like going from up here just to like cratering down, right? And so that means if you are a liquidity provider on Uniswap V3, for instance, you're going from probably printing fees to just like earning almost nothing over the weekend. And that means if you're encountering any degree of impermanent loss over the weekend, basically it's becoming a much less rewarding experience to provide liquidity there. And I think part of the benefit of the emissions-based model for liquidity providers is that stream's going to remain just the same over the weekend as it is over the week. So you can be a bit more hands-off. Still want to make sure you're staying in range and all that fun stuff, but it's a bit more predictable, a bit more hands-off. And with our implementation of concentrated liquidity too, we also have wider tick spacing. And what that means is it allows you to set your ranges wider without needing to constantly rebalance depending on the kind of pair, right? So Ace gave me the idea of maybe it's better to talk about these as like tick buckets, right? But basically you can like set a 3-tick range and it will represent a wider range than what a 3-tick range would be on Uniswap. And that also, I think, just creates a better liquidity providing experience because you can not need to worry about constantly rebalancing quite as much or setting, insanely narrow ranges or things like that. So I think it's definitely been one of our focuses is to try to make the liquidity experience as user-friendly as possible. And I think you see the fruits of that labor in the fact that, on Optimism and Base, Velodrome and Aerodrome have more TVL than every other DEX, like combined, right? It's very impressive.
Yeah, I think the OG yield farmers kind of migrated to these DEXs because there's a couple of reasons. One, if you're paying attention to like voting incentives, you can pick the best pool for your liquidity, and they're fairly agnostic to the token ticker. It's more like, hey, where can I get the highest yield, and where's my liquidity going to be the most efficient? The other thing is like a lot of our LPs really like the token rewards, and they're not only LPs, they're also voters. So they're trying to acquire as many of the tokens as possible, lock them up, and then every week they're generating both the emission token and the voting rewards.
Yeah, and just highlighting the success of Velodrome and Aerodrome in the L2 landscape, it's pretty obvious that like most of the TVL has shifted on L2s to a combination of Base and Optimism. And I think it's really important to point out that Base's and Optimism's success in DeFi is pretty much solely because of Aerodrome or Velodrome, in my opinion. I mean, if you look at something like ZK Sync or Scroll or any of these other L2s, like they're really struggling with actually stimulating activity. And I think there's a strong testament there for what Velodrome and Aerodrome have done. So
Yeah.
you guys.
Yeah, I don't think we can take all the credit, but what I do think is special about these models is that they do basically serve as secondary economic engines of these ecosystems, right? When you look at the like total, sort of like value that a velodrome has injected into the Optimism ecosystem in the forms of fees generated in emissions and things like that. I mean, it is as large, if not larger, than some of the like entirety of grant rounds on Optimism. So if like Optimism's giving out OP tokens as grants to try to incentivize activity, the fact that there's one protocol that is injecting just as much value, on a daily or weekly basis into the ecosystem, it does have this economic multiplier effect. And this is actually very important to the launch of Aerodrome on Base, because what we knew from the very beginning, and I'm sorry if anybody's still holding on to hope for the idea of there being a Base token or Base airdrop, but I do not think there will be one. But Base was basically, in this situation where they were going, so we're going to have ETH, that's going to be our gas token. We're part of Ethereum. We're going to have OP, that's going to govern changes to the chain. So that is essentially our governance token. But we're missing the third role that ecosystem tokens usually play, which is the incentivization token, right? What is the token that's going to help attract projects, liquidity providers, and traders? And so there was this kind of hole to be filled. And that's where Aerodrome came in, right? Where the Aero token is being emitted every week and rewarding ecosystem participants for showing up and driving activity on chain. And I think this is why you've seen people like Coinbase Ventures and the Base Ecosystem Fund, get engaged directly with Aero, because it is playing a very unique but very critical role in the ecosystem, whereby the ecosystem is being incentivized. There is an economic engine without the Base team needing to take on, any of the risk or complexity associated with launching a token. And, for me personally, I'd much rather Jesse, continue to focus on evangelizing and growing Base than like managing a Base DAO or, something like that. We see how, look at what's happened to Arbitrum since they launched the token. It's like they've just descended into this chaos of DAO management and grants and all that sort of stuff. We're free from it on Base, and I don't think it's cost them anything. There's no like trade-off. And so, yeah, I think it's really amazing. And, given the size of Aerodrome, and given that 100% of those fees and rewards are going back to the token, the token is very much tied to the success of activity on the broader ecosystem. So it creates kind of a beautiful growth flywheel for the ecosystem.
Yeah, that's particularly interesting what you say about having an L2 DAO and how that kind of encumbers the entire chain and divides the team's attention.
Hey guys, Permissionless, the event for crypto natives, is heading west to Salt Lake City, and we're bringing the biggest names in crypto together for an incredible can't-miss event. Join me and the rest of Blockworks on October 9th to hear from more than 200 industry titans, including Nick White from Celestia, Shiram from Eigenlayer, and Keone from Monad. The conversations at Permissionless will be covering the hottest themes in crypto, including modularity, restaking, the Bitcoin and Solana ecosystems, AI and crypto, rollups, L2s, institutional adoption, and of course the November election that will be right around the corner. We couldn't be more excited about this event, and it's happening in one of the most beautiful places in the US. Ticket prices will be increasing towards the end of June, so get your ticket today. Make sure to use the code so I get some credit and bragging rights from the rest of the team. Use 0x10 for 10% off on your ticket. One more thing, we're also hosting the Permissionless Free Hackathon in collaboration with BiddleBox. The theme this year is a multi-chain future, to build a better cross-chain experience so I don't have to have a heart attack every time I bridge to a new chain. All hackathon participants will receive a free ticket to attend Permissionless. So if you're a developer, come join us in Salt Lake City, team up with fellow devs, and build the multi-chain future.
Pear is an innovative pair trading exchange built on top of SYMMIO. Users can trade trending narratives with one click, from bluechip narratives such as long BTC, short ETH, right to the WIF versus BONK. The hat stays on. SYMMIO's intent-centric architecture enables deep liquidity, source off-chain, and broad on-chain, and combined with Pear, has democratized access to complex trading strategies typically reserved for institutional traders.
Rewinding to more of that LP experience, you guys launched Relay a couple months ago, and I was wondering if you could touch on that and address what issues this solves and how the adoption experience has been since.
Yeah. So Relay is very cool. So if you're familiar with the Curve ecosystem, which I know probably not everybody listening to this will be, but there's an amazing tool in the Curve ecosystem that was built called Vodium, right? And what Vodium essentially accomplished was, hey, look, as much as we all love on-chain governance and voting and all this sort of stuff, some of us would just like to deposit our lock tokens, our governance power, right, somewhere, have that system work automatically and kind of like deliver back to us the yield, right? So kind of an auto voting, auto compounding layer for those of us who just want to vote optimally, but we don't necessarily want to go in and click a bunch of buttons every week. Maybe you want to take some of that yield, go on vacation, right, and just come back to the rewards that you've earned. So we built that directly into the base layer on both Velodrome and Aerodrome, and that has some benefits to the extent that, like Vodium on Curve, they take a cut of that. They take a degree of the fees, right, which is completely fair for them to do because they're not a part of the broader DAO and they are providing the service. But because we built it in the base layer, we didn't need to add any fees to it. But essentially what it does is, like, if you take your VE Velo or VE Aero and you deposit it into the Maxi relays there, those relays are just going to vote for you optimally each week. So make sure that you get the sort of maximum amount of rewards back. It's going to compound those rewards back into Velo Aero, so it'll swap them, right on chain, and then compound it back into more VE Aero or VE Velo. So from a user standpoint, it drastically simplifies things, but it's also important for protocols. So for protocols, there's a ton of administrative work, of course, for all protocols every week, right? And we, work with people that it's like we have to remind them to incentivize, remind them to claim the rewards, et cetera, et cetera. So for protocols, they just want to be able to vote for their pairs each week, and they want to take those rewards, compound them into more voting power, and vote more rewards to their pairs, right? That's all they want to do. And so this takes all of the like multi-sig management out of their hands. And it also just creates a great flywheel because that is kind of constant buy pressure on the underlying token as well. So they're going out and buying more Velo, locking more Velo, voting more emissions or more Aero. And so it's just it's like a very flywheel positive sort of feature because it makes your life easier and it creates positive outcomes for the overall system.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. Like it's pretty absurd to expect an LP to log on at the end of every epoch and manually select which pools they're going to incentivize.
Mm-hmm.
I play a pretty big role in Uniswap's DAO with incentives for liquidity across multiple chains. And I can tell you firsthand, one of the worst things that we've been dealing with is just managing like 10 different multi-sigs and refilling contracts with incentives and figuring out the bridges. So once again, absolutely killing it on the user experience side for a protocol.
Yeah, for real.
So we have Relay, which is amazing, honestly, for LPs. But then going back into Slipstream, so this is one that kind of goes over a lot of people's heads, and I know you touched on it earlier, but could you give the TLDR of what Slipstream is, what it's enabled, and what adoption has looked like for that as well?
Yeah. I mean, the elevator pitch, right, is just, Slipstream brings UniV3 style concentrated liquidity to Aerodrome and Velodrome. And what we know, right, from watching the last few years here in DeFi and in crypto is that UniV3 is not right for every token, right? It's not right for every protocol or for every liquidity provider. I think everybody, including probably Uniswap themselves, now we're seeing them redeploy UniV2, right, on L2s. It sort of surprised them the degree to which other AMM models have remained very resilient, or that use cases around them have remained even in the presence of UniV3. But what UniV3 does do better than anybody else is for those extremely high volume pairs, right? Your wrapped ETH USDC pairs, your OP wrapped ETH pairs, basically those pairs that are doing enough organic trading volume to self-sustain, that the ability to tighten the liquidity in there makes them absolute volume drivers, right? It just means that they can soak up the vast majority of the volume in an ecosystem that's being routed through aggregators by delivering superior execution. So while we've always remained dominant on the TVL front, and while you might say like 90% of the tokens in the ecosystem maintain their primary liquidity on Velodrome or Aerodrome, from a pure volume standpoint, if 90% of the volume in the ecosystem is going through like wrapped ETH USDC any given day, you need that ability to concentrate liquidity in order to compete for that volume and thus compete for the fees, right, and the value that it creates. So Slipstream was our basically our answer to that. It's built from the UniV3 contracts, but includes a number of changes and say quality of life improvements. I mentioned that the tick spacing is one aspect of it. Our on-chain reward mechanisms too are also all built from scratch. You've seen in a lot of other ecosystems kind of maybe a shortcut taken for how to reward V3 style liquidity, which is like to take it to off-chain Merkle sort of stuff and distribute rewards that way. We are big decentralized maxis. We're very much like it all has to live on chain. There can be no centralized dependencies, no off-chain dependencies. So the reward is also 100% built on chain. But what this has allowed us to do is basically combine our massive TVL advantage with comparable execution to Uniswap. And this week, right, which has been a massive trading week for wrapped ETH USDC trading, right? It's speculation around the ETFs. And we've been seeing this slow climb up, right, where we're vamping away more and more of the volume from Uniswap. But on Base, like yesterday was the big test, right? Everyone's trading wrapped ETH, tons of volume. Can we deliver more volume than Uniswap? And we did. So we beat them on wrapped ETH yesterday. And I think the thing that is so interesting about this is that for all the more like market share volume that Slipstream claims from Uniswap, that creates a flywheel effect for us, right? Those pools continue to grow larger. They earn more emissions, more rewards, but it creates a very negative flywheel effect for Uniswap, because if we are taking half of what they would have earned in terms of volume, like we've done over the past few days, then that means fees are dropping proportionally on Uniswap. And as fees drop, that's generally the only incentive mechanism for these pools. Then liquidity drops, and the more liquidity drops, the more volume is going to be going through Aerodrome or Velodrome. And so we're just incredibly excited. I mean, the Slipstream growth has been parabolic, and we've only just recently gotten most of the aggregator integrators on board. There's still a lot more integration to go. We're adding automated liquidity management for those people who don't want to be micromanaging their LP positions every day. So there's a lot more still to come there, but we couldn't be more excited because I think, there's probably been like a dozen protocols that have raised, tens of millions of dollars saying, hey, we're going to flip Uniswap, on their core competency, and then just completely fizzled. We didn't raise any money, but that's our goal. And I think we're on the path to getting there, which is super exciting.
Yeah. And like, we can pat ourselves on the back, and we've got a lot of cool dashboards we built internally to like monitor volumes and TPLs, and it's all looking good, but I think we're still hungry. I mean, personally, there is a huge brand advantage that Uniswap brings to the table, and LPs just sometimes feel more comfortable because they understand the mechanism. They like collecting the swap fees, and even when the APRs are much higher for concentrated liquidity pools on Slipstream, because if you're actively managing your liquidity, you're going to grab a huge stream consistently of rewards. So we know that UX is still not the most intuitive. You have to kind of know how to rebalance liquidity positions, follow price movements. So we're very close to onboarding an automated liquidity manager partner called Mellow Protocol. And they've been going through a pretty thorough audit recently. But when that's done and deployed, I think it's going to be a pretty much no-brainer decision for passive LPs to go with Slipstream. I mean, if you've got really useful liquidity getting high rewards on the Aerodrome or Velodrome, it's going to be a slam dunk. Why you shouldn't do it, I don't know. So, but yeah, our data analytics are looking really, really good, and we're doing our best to kind of amplify the success we've had so far.
Yeah, that's super exciting. I kind of want to dive more into partnerships than UX, but before we go to that, I want to ask a bit about bribes and as a revenue source. Do you think that it could potentially be an issue eventually, especially if there's like concentration of bribes for a short period, like around a few bribers, and then when they stop? Obviously, you guys experience like a steady stream of bribes in general, but let's say a protocol had like a 1 week super large like bribing plan, and then later on they just decided to stop. Is that something that you guys try and adjust, or is there a way that you think about that?
Yeah, I don't think it's a concern. I mean, I think generally speaking, when protocols are incentivizing, they are subject to the market dynamics of their situation, right? If you drop an insane amount of your own token as incentives, people are going to make rational decisions about what to do with your token now that a whole bunch of it liquid has hit the market. And that there will basically be trade-offs or costs to that. Overall, there are like guidelines and strategies and things like that we try to provide to people to basically help them build like successful incentivization strategies, because we know very well now, what works or what doesn't work. But I think the best thing about the model is that incentives work just like fees in our system, right? So anybody who is incentivizing their token, essentially what they are doing is they are saying to VE Velo or VE Aero voters, hey, we know our pair doesn't do enough fees to justify the amount of emissions that we need to build liquidity. So we're going to make it up to you, right, through incentives. And so basically what it ends up being is if they are incentivizing, then it will look like a productive pool and folks will vote for it, because it is essentially on a voting basis just as productive as a high fee pool. But like if tomorrow on Aerodrome, every briber were to stop, which wouldn't happen because, there's no case where there's going to be less demand for liquidity on Base anytime soon. I think there's going to be 4x, 5x the demand for liquidity on Base. But if they were to stop, all the flywheel would do is shift all of its incentives towards the high fee pools. And if, like right now, just for instance, I was mentioning on wrapped ETH USDC, we're beating Uniswap on total volume. I think like only 5 to 10% of our total emissions are even going to Slipstream pools. If this epoch flip, that was like 80%, what would happen overnight is TVL on pools competitive with Aerodrome would go multiples higher, and we would just be soaking up even more fees, right? So it would basically swap the incentives for fees, and the flywheel would continue. And I think that's a cool thing. I think one of the beautiful things about the model is that it doesn't care who is paying for liquidity. Traders can pay for liquidity through their swaps and the fees they generate. Protocols can pay for the liquidity through token incentives. But either way, it all flows to the same place, which is to the VE token voters. And that supports the flywheel in a way that is way more resilient than models that just rely on incentives or just rely on fees. Because there will be moments where fees are huge. There'll be moments where incentives are huge, and there'll be moments where they kind of, fluctuate. But what you need for resiliency is just enough total like value being created flowing back into the system.
That makes sense. I want to understand Velodrome's Superchain Vision, because from what I understand, OP Stack has its own Superchain Vision. But you guys also released an article discussing your own Superchain Vision. What does that look like?
Yeah, it's actually quite well aligned with the Optimism vision, for interoperability and a unified experience across Web3. I see it as what the future of Ethereum scaling really looks like. It combines some of the components that even Vitalik has praised from like Cosmos, where you have the ability to move tokens across a chain without having a wrapped version or a bridge, and it's just a seamless experience. Like, Alex eloquently put it as like, as seamless as using the internet today. You don't know what's going on behind the fiber, and who's hosting the website, and who's the payments provider, and it's like you're just using a website, and it's like it's ubiquitous across the world. I see Optimism Superchain experience kind of mimicking that for Web3. And we want to be there as the liquidity layer that supports all the different dApps, all the different users, all the different institutions, what have you. So our strategy is to start engaging very early with all these new L2s. And mind you, there are a ton of them, because it's become very easy to deploy and maintain a chain through things like Espresso and Conduit. So we're seeing lots of teams interested in deploying in the Optimism stack, because they're providing such awesome infrastructure, not just the code, but the resources and the people and the users and the grants. I mean, part of the Optimism strategy is to reinvest all of the sequencer revenues that they're generating into to builder incentives. I mean, it's a pretty egalitarian approach, and they're very much encouraging the success of the L2s that they're onboarding in that fashion, rather than saying it being more of a selfish chain. So our vision is, like I said, where we want to deploy on as many of these L2s as needed. Every L2 has a different approach in liquidity needs. So we're talking to anyone and everyone. I mean, whether you're a DeFi chain or a gaming chain or a banking chain, it's like you're going to have a desire for liquidity and people to swap assets that are used to service the various applications. So we have already launched the first 2 instances of Velodrome outside of the Optimism mainnet. We've got a incentives program actively ongoing with Mode, and they're very much a general purpose DeFi chain, and they have a really great ecosystem that's developing. Bob is our second deployment. It's the build on Bitcoin kind of DeFi focused chain. It's still early, but we are deployed, and users are able to earn spice points. We have several others in the pipe. I think from our first iteration here, it's very much a simple liquidity provider incentives approach. But in about a month to 2 months away, we'll be deploying kind of this Superchain Velodrome 1.0, which will include voting gauges. So partner protocols and partner chains can actually incentivize votes directly from the L2 chain that we deployed on, which is very cool. And users will have the ability to vote for gauges outside of the OP mainnet. That's kind of what Superchain Beta 1.0 will look like for Velodrome. Beyond that, we are very much excited about kind of the interoperable future where, like I mentioned, tokens can move across chain, smart contracts can be interacted with from any chain. And perhaps that's where we start thinking about how we become a single liquidity layer, like a Velodrome chain, for instance, that interacts with all these various applications across the L2s.
Yeah, I think the Superchain vision is super interesting, and I think that like a lot of people are really sleeping on this. Like they look at something like Solana and they're like, "This is the future. There's no fragmented liquidity." But it's like the current state of L2s is not the end state of L2s. I'm picturing a world where you go to MetaMask or your Coinbase wallet, and it doesn't matter what chain your assets are on. It completely abstracts that experience away. And then you go to something like Velodrome and Aerodrome and swap across any chain and deposit pools into any chain, regardless of what chain that is. When you look at some of this cross-chain messaging infrastructure, I'm assuming that Optimism is going to agree upon some sort of standard to facilitate the communication between all these OP stack chains. But we're also seeing Across came out with the new token standard for interoperability, and then also Catalyst AMM just emerged. So I was wondering if the Velodrome/Aerodrome vision is you integrating these new token standards and collaborating with these new cross-chain partners, or if you're going to build something yourself.
Yeah. So we've been working closely with OP Labs from the beginning, and yes, I think what you'll see from Optimism and from OP Labs is some stuff that is new and novel, or maybe very specific to implementations across OP stack chains, and there might also be areas where they kind of put out requests for proposals or allow other people to build tech on top of this. But the beauty of building on the Superchain specifically is that you are able to build these interoperable standards, knowing that the underlying chain technology on every superchain is going to remain constant, right? Because even when you have an upgrade like 4844 that comes and requires all the chains to upgrade, that upgrade goes live on each chain simultaneously, right? Which is very different than even across other L2s where you saw Optimism go live with the 4844 upgrade. You saw, I think, Blast just straight up go down for a while before they figured out and got the upgrade deployed. Arbitrum sort of like phased it out. So if you were like building interoperably between all of those, that would have created a lot of issues and complications potentially for any of this like interoperability tech. The beauty of what we'll be doing on the OP stack chain is that will remain a constant, which makes the implementation of some of the messaging standards and other things a bit more simple to execute. So yes, our plan is very much to integrate very tightly into the tech that OP Labs and the broader collective is developing around this. We've been providing feedback and input into that for some time. And we think that'll mean that the interoperability experience on the superchain and between superchains will feel, much better than, some of the interoperability standards that are trying to bridge together these disparate chains, because really our goal is that Velodrome in the end state of the superchain feels like a single cohesive liquidity hub, no matter what chain you're on, right? So if you're on a gaming chain, you're just looking to swap out your gaming points or whatever you've earned, right, for ETH. You don't need a dedicated Velodrome deployment on your gaming chain. You just need to be able to access the Velo chain and the liquidity living on it, right? And that is the solution to the fragmentation issue that allows for deeply accessible liquidity across all of these chains. And I think is very much like the future we're moving towards.
It's an incredible problem to try to solve, but
Yeah.
very optimistic that you guys will integrate deeply in there and fix some of these issues. One other question I have for you is, being that you're kicking Uniswap's ass on every L2, have you considered going live on Ethereum mainnet and trying to vampire attack there and seeing how that would work out?
Yeah, I mean, we're always keeping like our eyes on the broader landscape and any opportunities that might be present. But I think a few things come to our mind when we're looking at those opportunities. One is that I think we've had a lot of success in not sort of like going to where the activity is, but going to where the activity will be. And like when we launched on OP mainnet, we had a ton of people coming to us and saying, "Why would you deploy here? It's a dead chain, right? You know, what are you guys doing? Why aren't you going to Avalanche, right? Still the alt L1 moment. Why don't you build it on Phantom? You know, why aren't you going to Solana?" But our whole thesis was that Ethereum L2s were going to grow exponentially, right? Even in going into a bear market, that they would grow exponentially. And that thesis is very much played out. And I really think we're still just in the very beginnings of it. And so when we think about where to devote our sort of time and attention, we think focus is a moat. And you can see this in the fact that multi-chain dexes really struggle outside of one core ecosystem. You know, 90% of Curve's liquidity, its fees or whatever, probably even more than that, 95%. It's all still Ethereum mainnet. It's a bit of a meme when it says they're on 14 chains. It's like they're kind of there, but not in like a very meaningful way. That's why we've been able to like build the advantage we have. And so I think our thought process is, you know, the OP stack is about to enter stage 1 decentralization. We think that's going to be another major unlock for growth as many liquidity providers, projects look to security assumptions and need that sort of stage 1, stage 2 guarantee before they move. And so while I'm not saying we'd never rule out, you know, something on Ethereum mainnet, I think what we're honestly going to see is far more of what is on Ethereum mainnet now, what is on Polygon now, what is on Arbitrum now, what is on Solana now, moving to where we already are. And we are here to basically help facilitate that growth. So we think that basically there could be more growth potential there than potentially even, you know, going to where some of the activity is, right? We're trying to see ahead of the curve.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially if you look at some of these other dexes, like Balancer, who did go to Avalanche and then every L2, but kind of like, I don't know, like half-assed their way onto the chain. There's nothing going on there. So they just kind of expose themselves to more of a security risk, and they're not really reaping any rewards from it.
That's exactly it. We want to go whole ass anywhere we are, right?
Talking about being, let's say, more active projects on chains, I feel like we kind of brought this up earlier about how because of your unique position as, like, let's say, being one of the leader DeFi project on both Optimism and Base, you get, like, I feel like you guys are more part of those development conversations. How has it been building on Base and Optimism, and how, like, as you said, you guys were confident that over the bear that L2s would flourish and they would do really well. Like, how has that experience been over the past year?
I'll let Alex kind of fill in the gaps here, but I've been part of the team for 2 months and I've been overjoyed, I guess, with the support that we've gotten from the base team specifically. And I was so wrong about how base would succeed. I was like, these guys don't have tokens to give out. How are they going to attract builders? How are they going to attract users? And it's been incredible to see their attention to the various ecosystem participants. They're very DeFi native, so they're engaging the same way that you and I would with Telegram and Twitter, and they're responding to requests for introductions and referring projects to each other. So they're like very much a network builder at the social layer, and the dev tooling that they've provided has facilitated this sort of if you build it, they will come environment. So with their long-term strategic initiative to move their business on chain, it's become, similarly attractive to long-term oriented building teams. So, Alex kind of talked about our foundation model where we don't have a token allocation. We're never going to be able to unlock a large amount of supply as team members to sell and cash out. It's a aligned strategy where we have to succeed in order for all of us to get paid and grow. It's like the foundation must continue to generate rewards. But yeah, that's my take on it from the base team's point of view. Optimism has a humongous amount of participants in various governance initiatives. We've been at the core of the Optimism governance activities since day one. We've got an incredible evangelist and advocate for governance on our team, Jack, who's read every word of anything posted in Optimism governance forums twice. He's been a large proponent of the success that we've received because of the various grants. And it's allowed us to be pretty integral into the vision going forward for Optimism's growth in terms of how they're going to be incentivizing through grant activities. So that's kind of my take. It's great ecosystems to build within, and the resources have been instrumental in our own growth.
That makes sense. And whatever you guys are paying Jack, you need to pay him way more, because I've dealt with those L2 governance forums and it's not fun at all. So Jack, you're doing the Lord's work. I guess I want to ask like a couple of final questions. What would you say is like on your radar over the next 6 to 12 months? What's like some things that you genuinely are really, really excited to get out and you think that people should look forward to?
Yeah, I think the first thing is the thing that I just mentioned a bit earlier, which is OP stack chains reaching stage 1 decentralization. When you talk to some of the largest like institutions, liquidity providers, some major projects and protocols who are very security minded, right? One of the major reasons that they will cite for not yet having moved to layer 2, where we know everything is better, right? Everything's faster, everything's cheaper. The yields are better, right? There's just like literally everything's better on an L2 to the point where if I have to go to L1 for anything these days, I like have a deep sigh and like reluctantly pull out my ledger and like go to work, right? So we know that there's nothing from a UX experience or from a rewards perspective that is like better on layer 1 right now. It is security, it is the liquidity depth, it is those types of things. And so for every OP stack chain, and that includes base, and that includes OP mainnet, and that includes mode and everyone else to reach stage 1, I think is going to be a major growth unlock for them, in that it's going to remove a degree of the friction that's there right now for migration. And we also know that their plan is very much to shift immediately to their number 1 focus being to fast track to stage 2 decentralization, which will increase, the security even farther. And so I think we're super excited for that. And I think if you combine that with this year seeing the beginnings of the interoperability between these super chains, as well as like the announcement and deployment of a lot more super chains, I think we've just started to scratch the surface. I think it's maybe like a bit underappreciated that like every major DeFi team has chosen to build on the OP stack, whether they're forking it and not participating in the super chain, or they are choosing to participate in it. It's just become the de facto technology on which to build L2s. There's a lot more coming. And so I think the combination of the increasing security of the beginnings of interoperability, of the growing of the network effects by virtue of more protocols deploying, is just going to be a crazy growth catalyst for not only Ethereum L2, but everything Ethereum L2 that's being built on the super chain. And for us personally in that, right, there's two things. We're obviously excited about seeing Velodrome deploy across all of these chains, right? Tap into that interoperability. We don't see any other DEX player focused on this right now. And so, we are very happy to front run them like we front ran them on L2s generally, and sort of build a very unique experience. But to do that while also, having things like Slipstream eating away at the last bastions of like Uniswap's footprint on these L2s, I think it just paints like a very, very exciting picture. We're going to be the hubs on what we think will be the largest Ethereum L2s, some of the largest, crypto networks in DeFi, and it's just going to be fun to watch this whole thing play out, this journey that we started 2 years ago.
I'm waiting for the next Coinbase earnings call, and when Jesse Pollock gets called up by Brian and talks about how awesome Base is, and that Aerodrome is at the liquidity hub of the chain. So that's what's getting me excited. I think Coinbase's wallet is their smart wallet is phenomenal. I've gotten a demo, and it's like incredible how easy they've abstracted the experience for their existing Coinbase users. And on-chain Summer 2 starting in a week. So we'll see how this goes, but should be a tremendous amount of new users coming into the ecosystem.
Ace, I was a bit surprised that you mentioned that the Base teams were very, very native. I guess just because of the branding, or maybe it's just like some initial assumptions. I would have assumed that they were a bit more suited up, as opposed to they're very like native. And
yeah, it's surprising because that's the approach that I guess the thesis I kind of had initially. But Jesse is very much, he's like a native himself. He's built crypto companies before Coinbase, and he's setting the tone internally. Like, he wants to build a very open financial, open building community, across Base. Like, there's no walled gardens on this L2. Like, everyone was like, oh, it's going to be the corporate chain and the KYC AML chain. And so far it's been come one, come all. Do experiment the same way that Ethereum always has been. And I think he's creating and cultivating a team with similar approach. And they've had a lot of people come through that team. Some have moved on to bigger and better roles, but they're always putting new talent into the team. And I think they all come from a similar cloth, like the four of us do on this call. It's like they're all degens at heart. And Base is very much a unique team relative to the rest of the broader Coinbase organization, which might be a lot more suited up.
Yeah, I think about the Base team as like a very much a founder-led startup, right? In Jesse being the founder, of him being totally crypto Ethereum aligned. And when when Jesse talks about bringing 1 billion users on chain, he's willing to do his part in like onboarding his grandmother, his friends, his cousins. Like he will literally onboard you to wallets, to all this sort of stuff. So he'll do that work. So it has the power of like a founder-led startup. And it just happens to be a founder-led startup with the resources of a multi-billion-dollar publicly traded company that's delivered some of the best consumer-level crypto products that exist. And that sort of combination is what I think makes Base so uniquely compelling. And I do think it has been a surprise to some. But like, you know, I think there are things that if Coinbase were to ever want to go a different direction, you know, a non-open direction, a non-Ethereum aligned direction, you'd know it because it would be over Jesse's dead body. You know, he'd be walking out the front door. I mean, that is just how much of an advocate he is for the broader vision. And I think you feel it in the experience you have on chain, and it's why we've bet, you know, in a very large way on Base being one of, if not the leading chains in all of crypto, like sooner than many expect.
Yeah, I'm still very surprised about this. I guess I have to have Jesse on the podcast and ask him about it.
You should.
Alex, Ace, thank you guys so much for coming on, evangelizing Velodrome, Aerodrome, and Base. It was a pleasure to speak to you guys.
Thanks for having
Likewise.
us, guys. It was fun.